morning, Africans, and I hope this video finds you well wherever you are. In our last video, we assessed the role of Wagner Group in Africa, and we came to the conclusion that Wagner Group was not in Africa to fight wars, but Wagner Group was in Africa to wage wars. We also agreed that Wagner Group might be supporting terrorism in Africa and at the same time offering military assistance against the same extremists. In this video today, I want to claim and I want to inform Africans that Africa is the new site for the 21st century Cold War between the United States and Russia. If I refer to the Cold War is known to be a propaganda war between the United States and the Soviet Union immediately after the end of the Second World War. Cold War started when Nazi Germany surrendered. That was in May 1945. Now, Cold War was majorly between the United States and the former Soviet Union. United States was extremely concerned about Russia's influence in Eastern and Western Europe. The United States formed NATO to counter Russian influence in Europe, and the Cold War of the 1945 onwards involved propaganda, economic aid, and many others. But the war never involved military conflict. Why am I saying that Africa is the new site for 21st century Cold War between the United States and Russia? Today, the United States has been very careful to sanction every African country with diplomatic ties to Russia and Moscow. The US has been extremely careful to sanction every African state with diplomatic ties with Russia. I will give you several examples of African countries currently under United States sanctions because of their strong ties with Russia. Let us start with South Africa. South Africa is one of the best performing economies in Africa. It is a country located in Southern Africa, and currently South Africa belongs to the long list of countries with strong diplomatic ties with Russia. Recently, there were some arguments about South Africa's role in arresting the Russian President Putin, and South Africa expressively said that Putin was an head of state and South Africa was not capable of arresting him. Over the years, South Africa has maintained strong trade relations with Russia, but these relations have come with its costs. Recently, the United States accused South Africa of providing Russia with arms to aid the war in Ukraine. And the United States was very straightforward and very careful to announce that it was considering sanctions against South Africa. Primary reason, connections with Russia. Now, the current economic war in South Africa is as a result of the conflict between the United States and Russia. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is also one of the many countries in the southern part of Africa. Economically, Zimbabwe has not been performing well, and the country has relied on economic aid, financial aid, and military aid to survive. The United States has always attended to Zimbabwe, not with aid, not with weapons, not in terms of governance, but using sanctions. In May 2023, that is May this year, the United States accused Zimbabwe's government of human rights violations. In reaction to this, the United States issued sanctions against Zimbabwe. An arms embargo was issued on Zimbabwe. Why? I believe the claim of human rights violations was just a claim, as I said. Zimbabwe was sanctioned by the United States because of its strong ties with Russia. Now you remember the trade relations between Zimbabwe and Russia has been ongoing for years, and as always, the attraction between Russia and Zimbabwe has attracted the attention of the United States, and the United States has claimed that Zimbabwe leads in the list of countries with high rates of human rights violations, and in reaction, the United States has sanctioned Zimbabwe. Those are just two African countries. I go to South Sudan. Currently, there is no war in South Sudan. There is no live war in South Sudan, but recently there has been war between the current president and the current opposition leader. The United States extended sanctions on South Sudan on 30th May this year. The United States joined a list of 10 countries, members of the United Nations Security Council, that voted to extend sanctions against South Sudan. South Sudan is one of the countries with links to Russia, and as usual, as a country with strong links to Russia, South Sudan has attracted the attention of the United States, and the United States has reacted with sanctions. You can see that the United States coerced the United Nations Security Council to vote in support for an extension of sanctions against South Sudan. I go to Central African Republic, which is a country in Central Africa and one of the many African countries currently experiencing armed conflict. Central African Republic has had ties with Russia for many years, and Central African Republic is one of the countries in Africa with a high presence of the Wagner Group machineries. The presence of Wagner Group machineries in Central African Republic has always angered the West, the United States. And in reaction to Russian presence in Central African Republic, the United States, through the United Nations Security Council, imposed an arms embargo, issued sanctions against the Central African Republic in 2013. For many, the arms embargo, the sanctions against Central African Republic, may seem as usual, but to a deep political eye, the current arms embargo on Central African Republic, imposed by the United States and the UN Security Council, is as a result of the ongoing conflict between Russia and the United States. I go to Angola. Angola is also a country in Southern Africa. Angola has been an ally of Russia for years, and as an ally of Russia, the United States has not spared Angola. In 2002, the United States sanctioned UNITA, that is the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, a political party. The United States stated that UNITA was not a political party but an extremist group. Now, the reaction of United States to Angola's political party is not by chance, but it is an extension and open validation of their displeasure with Russian presence in Africa. I go to Mali. In my last discussion, I identified Mali as among the African countries with presence of Wagner Group machineries. And as usual, any African country with a high presence of Wagner Group machineries must attract the attention of the United States. The United States imposed sanctions against Mali in December 2021, citing insecurity as a concern. The United States classified Mali as one of the many African countries with a significant threat of rebels. Instead of ensuring that the conflict in Mali ends, the United States, noting that there is Russian presence in Mali, issued sanctions against Malians and their government. I go to Algeria. Algeria is a country in northern part of Africa. In my last discussion, I never identified Algeria, but in this, while confirming the Cold War confrontation between Russia and the United States in Africa, Algeria is among the countries of interest. On 30th September 2022, Lisa McLean, that is one of the representatives in the Congress in the United States, rallied other congressmen and women to consider sanctions against Algeria. And their primary argument was that Algeria was having ties with Russia. You can remember, if you read a bit, you can remember that Algeria is among the countries with the trade relations with Russia. Now, American congressmen and women considered sanctions against Algeria basically because of their ties with Moscow. Sudan. Currently, there is a war going on in Sudan. The government forces, the government army, are fighting the rapid support forces, or the paramilitary rapid support forces, which is, in my view, a rebel group. And Americans and the United States government believe that Russia, through the Wagner Group, is supporting the rapid support forces. They believe that Russia, through the Wagner Group, is providing military equipment to the rebel group, the rapid support forces. And with this belief, the United States government and the Biden administration on May 4th, 2023 signed Executive Order 14098 to sanction companies and individuals in connection with the RSF, Rapid Support Forces. At this point, you can see that the United States, through Biden administration, sanctioned companies and individuals in Sudan. Why? Because of their links with Russia and Wagner Group. Tanzania. Tanzania is a country in Eastern Africa. During the presidency of the late President John Pombe Magufuli, Tanzania had a history of, let me say, detachment from the West. Magufuli openly criticized the West, especially the United States, for its involvement in African affairs. In 2021, January 20th, 2021, the United States government announced visa restrictions for Tanzanian officials who are responsible, or who they believed bungled the country's general elections that was held in 2020. Now you can see the United States sanctioning Tanzanians and Tanzanian government for failure to uphold democracy. Democracy has been one of the top reasons for the United States to engage African countries. The United States always invade other countries in the name of imposing democracy. In Tanzania, the United States issued sanctions, restricted visas for various government personalities for their perceived involvement in the bungled 2020 general elections. That is Tanzania. I believe the war between the United States and Tanzania is not of the elections. it is because Tanzania has openly criticized the US involvement in African affairs. Liberia. Liberia is in most cases known as the free country. It is one of the countries in Africa that was never colonized, and currently it is one of the countries with strong ties with Russia. Liberia is in West Africa. January 11th, 2023, this year, Russia celebrated 67 years of strong diplomatic ties with Liberia. Before that celebration, the United States sanctioned senior government officials from Liberia. Their reason that these individuals supported and participated in corruption. In my view, United States reasoning, citing corruption as one of their main reasons for sanctioning individuals from Liberia, does not add up, has no water. The United States sanctioned Liberia officials because of their strong ties with Russia. I look at Burkina Faso. In my last discussion, I don't know whether I identified Burkina Faso as one of the countries, African countries, experiencing war. But in this, Burkina Faso is known for its trade relations with Russia. And with this comes sanctions from the United States. February 20th, 2023, that is this year, the United States supported ECOWAS' decision to extend sanctions against Burkina Faso. Now you can see the United States is working with African trading blocs to consider sanctions against African countries. And remember, early this year, Burkina Faso government invited Wagner Group to help in the fight against extremism in the country. This invitation angered the United States and NATO. As usual, the presence of Wagner Group in any African country must attract the attention of the US. And the United States, citing presence of Wagner Group in Burkina Faso, considered sanctions against the government and individuals. Uganda. Although Uganda has not openly declared their support for Russia in the ongoing war with Ukraine, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has openly criticized the West for involving in African affairs. Recently, Ugandan government angered the West with their anti-homosexuality law 2023, which criminalized homosexuality in the country. In fact, the Ugandan government issued and considered death penalty for homosexuals in the country. With this came US sanctions. Ugandan officials, members of parliament, the president were barred from accessing the United States. From all the countries that I have discussed, there is some commonality. One, in all the countries that I have discussed, Russia has trade relations with them. In all the African countries that I have discussed, Russia has trade relations with them. And in some of these African countries, Wagner Group machineries are present. Another commonality in the African countries that I have discussed is that the presence of Russia and the presence of Wagner Group has attracted the attention of the United States. And as usual, the United States has reacted with sanctions. These two commonalities lead me to conclude that Africa is the new site for Cold War between the United States and Russia. The United States is very careful to counter Russian influence in Africa. And this countermeasure has come in the form of sanctions against African countries and African governments. You can see that Africans are not fighting a war of their own, but they are currently fighting an imported war. Africans are fighting a proxy war that should be fought between the United States and Russia. Africans have been implicated in a war of dominance between the United States and Russia. African countries are being sanctioned currently because of their relations with Russia. I urged Africans to put their governments to task. I urged Africans to question their governments for their involvement with the Wagner Group. At this point also, I urge Africans to question the keen interest of the United States in their affairs. I believe African countries are independent and their governments are free to forge trade relations with any, and I mean any willing partner. If Russia is capable of providing aid to African countries, then I believe African countries and African governments are free to form diplomatic ties with them. The United States should not act as a watchdog to African countries. I believe the United States should not dictate who and how African countries should forge their trade relations. For Africans, I believe you are fighting an imported war. The wars currently ongoing in Sudan, in Mali, Central African Republic, DR Congo, Ethiopia, Somalia, all these are imported. And in the 21st century, with the Cold War between Russia and the United States ongoing, Africans have been engaged in pure military conflict. Africans are fighting on behalf of Russia and the United States. My last message to Africans is still the same. Put your governments to task. Question their involvement with Russia and the United States. And thank you.